What is this course really about? How is it different? So you probably already watched the video before you bought this course, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth here and talk about what other courses, other ways of thinking, and what the culture right now in business and professional fields and in leisure activities, how people think about note taking. So one of the biggest differences, and really the essential difference, is this focus on the long-term view, on retention. And most note-taking systems, where they fail is they're not thinking about how does this happen, how does this play into getting spaced repetition so that this information eventually gets embedded into your brain and you can use it. And the other half of that is some information isn't worth memorizing. You may only use it once. You may not need it for a few months or years from now. So you need to have a way of retrieving that information. So it's not just about memorization, which is retrieval from your brain. It's also how can you retrieve from your external brain quickly, and that requires organization. Another thing is the difference between summary and synthesis. Going back up for a second, we're also going to be talking about how to organize your information. I'm not going to go super in depth because to really master that, that's a whole course in and of itself, and that course will be coming out in the future. If you're interested in that, send me an email, and I'll let you know. I may even be able to get you better access to that. Summary, not synthesis. So what that means is you can't just summarize ideas. You can't just underline stuff. You need to convert what you're learning, what you're putting into your head, into a language that you understand. And you also need to be thinking about what is my future self going to need when my future self is rereading these notes or rereading this book or rereading the annotations I'm making in this book. So if you took the previous course, there's going to be a little bit of overlap because annotation is so important for reading. I included that in the speed reading course, but I'm also going to talk about that here. So just skip that video if that's you, if you're coming from the speed reading course. But that's really important, is to be doing that while you're reading, because you'll find, at least for me, when I'm reading and I finish a book, I want to put it down. I want to put it away. I want to move on to something else. Yeah, I feel like everything's still very active in my head. So I usually like to wait and then come back and do a next layer or next level or stage of synthesis. But what happens is if you haven't taken any notes, if you haven't done any annotations, then when you come back, you're starting from square one. You don't get to use any of that work you did beforehand. So the benefit of that is that you do that annotation and then you come back, you translate those ideas, those new ideas, into your existing vocabulary, translate into something you understand. Then it's a lot easier to synthesize and combine those ideas. Otherwise, you're going to have to do that translation work again. And that takes a lot of work, that takes a lot of effort, and all of that energy that you use doing that is taking away from energy you could use in the next stages of the learning process. Another thing is this focus on actionable information. This is something that's a fad right now, the focus on just in case versus just in time information. Just in time information means, well, this is what I need right now, so this is what I'm going to do. Just in case information is, well, I don't know if I need this right now, or I don't know if I'm going to need to know this in the future, but just in case, I'm going to learn it anyways. And the problem with this is a very short-term view on how to learn. And for some context, for some situations, it's necessary because let's say you're running a company and you have a knowledge base of everything you want your employees to know, then they're doing some predefined task where they're going to be doing the same thing or same types of things over and over again. So all they need is that just in time information. They don't need to be going out exploring, learning new ideas. They just need to do what they've been trained to do and get access to information. So that's when just in time information is great. But if you want to be creative, if you want to come up with new ideas, and that's very important as entrepreneurs to do that, or if you want to advance your career, you're thinking professionally, what do I do to get to the next stage? I need to innovate. I need to come up with something new. And that's why you're learning. Then you need to be able to handle knowledge and information that may not be useful right now, or may build a framework or a system of thinking that'll be useful in the future. So actionable information is just a way of filtering out bad content. There's a lot of different ways to filter out bad content, but just because something isn't actionable right now doesn't mean it isn't really, really, really valuable. So uh, make sure that you're not making that mistake of just focusing on, well, what's actionable or what's actionable right now, because oftentimes you can learn a lot from something, a book that's 50, 100, 200 years old, and the only difference is you take those ideas and then you translate them into today's technology, or even better, tomorrow's technology. So any innovator is thinking about, what's the technology tomorrow? How do I convert the ideas of today or yesterday into those technologies of tomorrow? Here's some common mistakes we're going to be talking more about. Not annotating when reading. That's huge, because if you don't do that, then when you do those spaced repetitions that you need to get to really learn this information, retain it, you're going to have to do that, all that work over again. And you're not going to be able to skip over the stuff that you realized was junk the first time. So just to give you a brief look at what I'm doing when I'm reading, is anything that I don't underline or I don't circle or do anything to, that's basically me telling myself, next time I read, this is me telling my future self 2-3 months from now, when you're reading this, you can basically ignore or skim over anything that isn't underlined, highlighted, circled, whatever. And then the annotations I make in the margins, which is little notes or summaries to myself, is, okay, this is really important, look at this again, or I don't even understand this yet, or summarize 5 paragraphs or a paragraph into half a sentence or a sentence and get it into something that I understand. Get rid of that alien terminology. That's the kind of stuff where you save a ton of time, and you can do a spaced repetition on a book that maybe took you 10-20 hours to read. You can get a spaced repetition in an hour or two because you do that summarization, that annotation during your first pass. And that's the key to this course, is that it's not about, well, I'm going to read this book once and take notes, or I'm going to go through this course, or you're at a conference, you're in a conversation, you're journaling to yourself, whatever it is. It's never about, well, I'm going to do this once. It's about, how many times do I need to do this so that I can either take action on it, get rid of it, or so I can really learn it and retain it, so I have access to it for a year, 5 years, rest of my life, whatever it is. And that's on a case-by-case basis. But if you're not focusing on, I need to retain this, I need to have access to this information in the future, then you're just losing phenomenal amounts of information. It's like over 90% after just a month after reading that book. So if you're not doing this stuff, then you're losing most of that information that you're putting in. You're wasting most of your time. That's why this stuff is so important, because this saves you time versus just rereading the same thing, spending that 10 hours over and over and over and over again each time you do a repetition. You want to be spending 1 hour, half hour, 10 minutes to do those repetitions and get the same value out of it, if not more, because it's synthesized, it's brought together, it's summarized. Transformation of information. I already kind of talked about that. Focus on spaced repetition. Coming back. So the memory course is going to talk more about how do you actually do those repetitions, but here we're going to be talking about, well, where do you put this information? How do you organize this, your notes or other information, stuff that you print out, things that you're reading? How do you organize that so you can come back to it later? So we're going to go a bit into that, but again, to really master that, that's a separate course, because it's a whole subject in and of itself. This course is focused on systems, not on software. And that was one of the biggest challenges in creating this course, was how do you create a system that works online, meaning in the cloud and on your computer, on your mobile device, on your iPad, on your phone, but also in paper form, in file cabinets, 3-ring binders, manila folders, however you want to do it offline, so that it can work completely if you just like doing stuff on the computer, or it can work completely offline if you like to stay off the computer as much as possible. So it's a minimalist, it works if you have a minimalist mindset, but it also works if you like doing things like audio notes or audio books, and you like consuming things that are video or audio as opposed to reading a lot. So there's the one thing I'll say about that is, don't limit yourself. So you may think, well, I've always really liked to read, or I've never liked to read, or never been good at reading. Sometimes that can be an innate part of yourself and just part of your genetics, your biology, but other times it's just a matter of you never got the practice when you were younger, or that wasn't part of your family or part of your culture, part of your peer group when you were younger. And so you never built those skills. And you can build those skills as an adult. It's just going to take time, it's going to take effort, and you're going to have to go through that initial pain period as you acclimate to that new skill. So a lot of people limit themselves in saying, oh, well, I've never done that, so I'm not that type of person or that type of learner. And there was a big movement over the last few decades where people were talking about learning styles and, oh, you're this type of learner, that type of learner. Turns out that a lot of this stuff isn't nearly as scientifically substantiated as people made it out to be, but it was really useful for selling learning systems to big governments, corporations, stuff like that. So it appealed to people because it told them, well, it's okay to be however you are right now. You don't have to change. That's something that's really useful when selling somebody anything. So it was something that was became part of the education and the learning culture, especially in the United States, because it was so useful for selling learning systems. But it's not actually based in a lot of scientific data and evidence. So a lot of people I've seen, they tend to assume, well, whatever way I've been doing and been learning, that's the best way for me, when in reality, people aren't that different. They're not just one style or one way. Their brains are a lot more flexible, and just because you have one strength right now doesn't mean that's the most effective way for you to learn. And people, usually what I find is people will say, well, I'm not a reader or I'm not a note taker. And the problem with that is it's a huge disadvantage. You're at a huge disadvantage if you can't read and you don't enjoy reading, and you haven't gotten to that stage where you're good enough at reading where you can enjoy it. There's a lot of things that you can't enjoy until you put in the training and the practice. Start any new sport, it's not usually fun the first time you do it because you don't have those skills yet. So you need to get up to a certain level of skill before you can really enjoy it, but it's definitely worth the practice. Some other note-taking courses that focus only on one type of note-taking or one software, one type of technology. So maybe it's just in the computer, it's maybe just offline. So they don't focus on how do you handle things that are in a bunch of different modes and modalities and different formats. Audio notes. So we're going to be going over audio notes. So not just how can you listen to things, but also how can you input with your voice and get a lot out of that. There's a lot there that other note-taking courses don't talk about. And we're going to be talking about every different type of note-taking also. So different types of note-taking are useful in different situations. And it's not about fitting a square peg into a round hole where, oh, well, everything, flowcharts is the best way to note-take, or mind mapping is the best way, or outlining, or audio notes is the best way. There's different situations. Each situation is going to have a different ideal format, or typing notes into the computer is better, or writing things by hand is better. So there's pros and cons to everything. It's about knowing which one to use in which situation, and also know about how they all fit together and what those pros and advantages and disadvantages are. This last piece is focused on taking action and spaced repetition. So what that means is sometimes this is stuff that you need to retain long term as information, principles, but not necessarily actionable. Other times you need to schedule something a week or a month or a year from now and come back to it later, or just know where it is. So it's, and we'll talk about this more in the memory section, but it's not just about knowing how to search for something, but you're going to forget that a lot of the things that you've read or consumed even exist. That's 90% of that stuff is just going to be gone. So that's why memorizing and having an organization system, and then having that memorized so you know where stuff goes, where stuff is, that's huge. We're going to be talking about how to set up the beginning stages of that, and something that's going to vastly improve what most of you have as an organization system right now. If you want to go really in depth, there's a separate course on that.